She was 20 and homeless. No room, no family, willing to answer, no account. She could reach just a scarred blue suitcase and $9 she had kept beneath its torn lining. And with that $9, she bought a forgotten gold leaf beater's studio outside Providence in Providence County, Rhode Island, erased from local maps in 1987. The north wall had bowed 6 inches. Rain entered through 3 broken roof valleys. The county condemned it on October 14, 2003, and marked it for demolition the following spring. Beneath its 100-pound marble mallet block waited a sealed cedar chamber, unopened for decades, holding the one inheritance that could alter the shape of her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. June Eliza Mercer had been leaving her whole life without knowing it. She learned departure in an apartment above a Pawtucket laundromat, where dryers shook the floor after midnight. By 8, she could fold a blanket small enough for a grocery sack. By 12, she knew not to unpack books when rent was late. Her mother Elaine worked reception desks and motel counters, always saying the next address would be the last. When June asked where they belonged, Elaine pressed an envelope seam and said, "Wherever the mail still finds us." The only place that held was her grandfather's workshop in Cranston. Silas Mercer restored gilded frames in a brick carriage house, and each Saturday set a stool beside the beating table for June. He melted narrow rolls of gold in a charcoal furnace, drew them thin, cut them into squares, and placed each square between sheets of prepared gold beater's skin. Then he lifted a 16-pound hammer and struck a rhythm that traveled into June's shoes. He taught her to turn the packet before its edges wandered, and hear when the leaf had thinned evenly. At noon they ate eggs and rye bread, their hands bright with dust, no washing removed. "Gold remembers every careless blow," Silas told her once after she hurried a packet and tore 6 leaves at the corners. He meant that damage was not always loud. Sometimes it appeared later under light, when the work was already finished, and there was no honest way to hide it. Silas died in February 2019. After pneumonia made the workshop suddenly too large, Elaine sold the carriage house with the property before June returned from a temporary job in Hartford. The furnace hammer's skin books and 3 walnut chests went with it. By the time June found the buyer, the tools had been dispersed among dealers who would not name their customers. 2 years later, June handed her savings to Harbor Key Residential, with smoked glass doors and a lobby smelling of lemon polish. Its manager, Conrad Vale, spoke softly enough that people leaned toward him. He aligned every pen and answered only after closing the folder before him. He assured June that her deposit secured a studio apartment on Federal Hill. Then, on October 3, 2021, Harbor Key posted a bankruptcy notice, locked the office, and disconnected every telephone line. June's landlord arrived the next morning, carrying a red plastic milk crate for her kitchen things. The lease had never been valid. Conrad had collected money on apartments he did not control. At the curb, June placed Silas's old whetstone in the crate, though she no longer owned a blade worth sharpening. Her landlord stood in the doorway with one hand on the frame. "You have 10 minutes. Leave the key inside." Elaine waited across the street in her beige sedan. June had called her before sunrise. She watched through the windshield as June rolled sweaters into the blue suitcase and tied the broken latch with shoelace cord. When June lifted the crate, Elaine lowered her eyes and started the engine. She did not wave. The car moved away before the suitcase wheels reached the sidewalk. For 6 weeks, June followed heat through Rhode Island and eastern Massachusetts. She slept 2 nights in the Providence bus terminal until a guard began checking tickets, then rode to Woonsocket, and spent 3 nights behind a church shed where rain tapped the aluminum roof above her head. In Attleboro, she paid $12 for a cot at a women's mission and woke with $38 left. She washed in library restrooms, dried her socks beneath hand dryers, and ate peanut butter crackers one sleeve at a time. A room in Fall River took $22 and gave her 4 hours behind a door that locked. By the time she returned to Providence, she had $9, one clean shirt, and a suitcase wheel worn flat on one side. On a sleeting Tuesday, June entered the Rochambeau Library and sat near a radiator shoes on folded newspaper. While waiting for the feeling to return to her toes, she opened a tray of county notices left beside the local history shelves. One card typed on a machine with a weak lowercase e announced a nuisance property disposal, abandoned commercial structure. Former Gold Leaf Beaters studio buyer assumes all liens, purchase price $9. She read it twice, then carried the card to the reference desk. The librarian, a narrow woman with silver hair held by 2 black pins, examined the notice and wrote a county office address on the back. "They are not selling you shelter," she said. "They are transferring a problem." June looked at the faded words, Gold Leaf Beaters Studio. Beneath her thumb, the paper had softened from years in the tray. She bought no supper. Before the library closed, she used its telephone to confirm the sale, then spent her last coins reserving a bus seat for the next morning. That night, she slept upright beside the radiator, the notice folded inside Silas's whetstone cloth. At dawn, June carried her suitcase toward the station, and the only door $9 had left open. The bus left Providence before sunrise, carrying June west, through streets glazed with old rain. She rode as far as north, situate with the blue suitcase braced between her knees, then walked 7 miles along Danielson Pike, while trucks pulled cold air behind them. The handle split before noon. She threaded her belt through both side grips and dragged the case until one wheel broke free near a stone wall. By dusk, she had covered another 4 miles and reached an open hay barn beyond a fallow field. The temperature fell to 27 degrees. June buried her legs beneath loose Timothy hay, laid Silas's whetstone against her ribs, and listened to a horse shifting in the neighboring stall until morning. She entered the village under a pale sky with straw clinging to her coat. A hand-painted board announced Foster Farm Supply beside a stack of salt bags. Across the road stood Bellini's Cafe Potter's Hardware, a Sunoco station with one working pump, and Marlowe's funeral home, its white porch scrubbed more carefully than any other building on the street. The 5 businesses faced one another, as though they had agreed long ago to witness everything and discuss nothing hurriedly. The county clerk's office occupied the ground floor of a former schoolhouse behind the library. Its brick steps had been worn shallow at the center by generations of shoes. June lifted her suitcase 1 step at a time, entered beneath a clock that had stopped at 4:12, and followed the sound of paper sliding through metal drawers. A woman sat behind a high oak counter. She had 1 white eyebrow and 1 brown, a difference made more noticeable when she looked over her glasses. The brass plate before her read MRS, Alma Pike Deputy Property Clerk. June placed the classified card on the counter. Mrs. Pike studied the card, then June's wet cuffs and the belt tied around the suitcase. "You came for the Calder Street nuisance parcel." "Yes, ma'am." The clerk opened a ledger large enough to cover half the desk. She did not ask June to sit. "You understand the building has no occupancy permit." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the well has not been tested since 1996." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the county will not repair the road roof chimney foundation or anything else attached to that deed." "Yes, ma'am." "You understand that once you sign, demolition costs become yours if the structure collapses." "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Pike waited. Outside, a delivery truck changed gears on the hill. The clerk looked toward the sound, then returned to June. "Your identification." June gave her a state card bearing an address that no longer belonged to her. Mrs. Pike copied the name slowly. "June Eliza Mercer." The pen stopped after the surname. "Mercer from Cranston. My grandfather lived there." "What was his given name?" "Silas." Mrs. Pike removed her glasses. Without them, the uneven eyebrows made her face seem less official and more tired. Silas Mercer repaired the gilt lettering on my father's fire helmet, she said. Would not take payment because the old man had carried him out of a workshop fire in 1968. Your grandfather worked gold leaf. I did. The clerk looked toward a narrow door behind her, where rolled plats stood in a wooden rack. The man who last worked the Calder Street place was Amos Vale. Silas came here asking about him more than 30 years ago. Said Amos had taught him how to judge a skin packet by sound. June's fingers closed around the counter edge. My grandfather never mentioned this studio. Old trades kept their own silences. Mrs. Pike replaced her glasses, sometimes too well. She brought out a 4-page deed and turned each sheet so June could see the places requiring initials. The nuisance parcel included the studio, a lean-to, a dry well, and 11/100ths of an acre running back to a seasonal creek. Taxes had been forgiven because collecting them cost more than the land was worth. The purchase price remained $9. June laid 9 worn bills on the counter. Mrs. Pike counted them once, placed 8 in the county envelope, and held the last dollar between 2 fingers. Its corner had been repaired with clear tape. Keep this one, she said. The notice says 9. The ledger will say 9. She opened her desk drawer and placed the bill beneath a tray of brass clips. June signed. Mrs. Pike fitted the deed into a cast-iron press and pulled down its curved handle. The brass county seal met the paper with a dry, exact snap. She dusted the impression with a square of blotting paper, then wrote directions on the back of an obsolete tax form. Take Danielson Pike east for half a mile. Turn right onto Rockland Road. At the abandoned Grange Hall, follow Calder Street south. The pavement ends after the second stone bridge. Your building is another 3/4 of a mile on the left, beyond 2 black walnut trees. Do not cross the creek if the water is over the lower stepping stone. She passed June a key tied to a wooden tag darkened by many hands. The clerk's thumb remained on the tag. Silas was careful with what he taught. If he kept that place from you, there may have been a reason. Or he ran out of time. Mrs. Pike released the key. That happens more often. The clouds lowered by early afternoon. June followed Rockland Road past stone walls and houses set far back among bare maples. A gray-haired man in a quilted vest watched her from beside a mailbox shaped like a barn. At his feet, a brindled dog with one folded ear made a low sound but did not leave the gravel. You headed to the old beating shop, the man called. June stopped. I bought it this morning. The man rubbed the dog's neck. Then you are the first person who has walked toward it carrying more than a camera in 20 years. The dog sniffed June's coat, sneezed at the hay dust, and returned to its owner. The man pointed south without another question. Calder Street narrowed into broken asphalt, then hard-packed earth. Water moved in the ditches beneath thin plates of ice. The 2 walnut trees appeared where Mrs. Pike had promised, their black limbs crossing above the road like work-worn hands. Beyond them stood the studio. It was built of red brick over a low fieldstone foundation, 30 feet long and perhaps 18 wide. Lime mortar had washed from the west wall in pale streaks. The roof sagged around a square chimney, and several slate tiles lay broken in the weeds. Over the front entrance, a narrow wooden sign remained attached by one iron hook. Most of its paint had gone, but June could still read the carved letters. A. Vale and daughter gold leaf beaters. There had been no daughter in the county notice. June climbed the 2 granite steps and fitted the key into the lock. It resisted halfway. She warmed the key in her palm, lifted the door by its handle to ease the warped frame, and turned again. The lock opened. Air passed out of this building, as though released from a held breath. It smelled of wet brick mouse nesting, old charcoal, and something faintly metallic. June entered sideways because the suitcase would not clear a fallen strip of ceiling plaster. The front room had once received customers. A counter ran beneath two windows, clouded with grime. When June wiped the glass with her sleeve, light entered in a narrow amber band and revealed gold dust fixed between the floorboards. It did not glitter brightly. It rested there like pollen after a season no one remembered. The silence was broken by water ticking into a tin cup on the floor. Each drop struck with the same hollow note. June touched the nearest wall. The plaster felt cold and damp, but the brick beneath it remained firm. Somewhere above, a squirrel scratched once and became still. A doorway led into the workroom. The 100-pound marble mallet block stood near the center beneath a webbed ceiling beam. Its upper surface was cupped from years of blows, and 4 wooden legs had been braced with iron straps. Beside it lay a round-headed beating hammer too heavy for casual use. When June lifted its handle, dust rose with the dry taste of chalk and settled on her tongue. Along the back wall stood a brick furnace too blackened annealing pans, and a narrow sink whose iron pump gave only a groan when she tried it. The room had no electricity. The windows admitted the final gray of afternoon, enough to show rat tracks crossing the gold-stained floor. June opened the rear door and found a lean-to with half its roof missing. Beyond it, the land sloped toward a creek, moving brown and deliberate beneath alder roots. The water smelled of leaves and stone. She knelt, rinsed her hands, and watched gold dust loosen from the creases of her fingers, flash once and disappear downstream. Darkness entered early. She carried her suitcase into the front room, swept one rectangle of floor with a broken fireplace broom, and spread her coat over flattened cardboard found beneath the counter. Her supper was the heel of rye bread given to her by a woman at the bus station. It tasted faintly of the paper in which it had been wrapped. The building shifted as the temperature fell. A roof slate clicked. Wind entered the chimney and moved through the furnace with a low, unfinished note. June lay on her side facing the doorway to the workroom, where the marble block remained visible as a darker shape inside the dark. She placed the deed beneath her head and Silas's whetstone beside her hand. The house had been waiting for her. By the third morning, June could cross the studio in darkness without stepping on the loose board beside the counter. The well stood 40 paces behind the lean-to, covered by a warped cedar lid and a stone heavy enough to discourage children. She tied a tin cup to clothesline found in a drawer, lowered it until the line went slack, and brought up water clear enough to show the cup's scratched bottom. She boiled every drop in an enamel pot blackened by mice. The outhouse leaned toward the creek, but its floor remained sound. She propped the door with a brick and learned to judge the wind before entering. At night, the building instructed her through sound. One floorboard snapped near the furnace when the temperature dropped. 3 boards beneath the front window gave a soft, descending complaint. The plank beside the marble block made no sound at all, even under her full weight. On the 4th day, she walked back to the village with the broken suitcase belt around her waist and Mrs. Pike's directions folded in her pocket. Potter's Hardware occupied a narrow storefront, smelling of linseed oil, iron filings, and coffee, kept too long on a hot plate. Drawers climbed the walls from floor to ceiling, each labeled in careful pencil. Behind the counter stood a broad man with a pale burn scar crossing his left thumb and disappearing beneath his cuff. He was fitting a wooden handle into a garden hoe, tapping it against the floor between sentences. "Elias Potter," he said. "You are Silas Mercer's granddaughter." News had traveled faster than June. "I need a chimney brush stove, cement a bucket, and anything that explains how not to bring a roof down on myself." Elias studied her coat, then the coins and small bills she placed on the counter. "That will not buy the list." "I know. You working somewhere. At the studio. That is not what I asked." "No." He tapped the hoe handle once more, then took a ruled account book from beneath the register. "I extend credit to people with an address. You have one now, even if the county objects to it." June did not touch the book. "I don't know when I can pay." "Then we will know when you do." He wrote, June Mercer called her street on a fresh line and gave her a blue-covered manual titled Home Repairs for Farm and Village Buildings. The cover had been mended with cloth tape. Free, he said. It belonged to my brother. He underlined everything except the useful parts. June bought only what could be carried, a 6-inch wire chimney brush for $8.75, 25 feet of jointed fiberglass rod for $11.40, a 5-pound tub of furnace cement for $6.20, a galvanized bucket for $3.10, and a used steel scraper for $1.50. Elias added 2 dust masks and a box of kitchen matches without entering them in the account. You find brick fallen inside the flue stop. How will I know? You will hear the brush strike something that does not move. She walked home with the rods tied lengthwise to the suitcase frame. Rain began at the second stone bridge and became sleet near the walnuts. The chimney took most of the next day. June opened the clean-out door at the furnace base and found it sealed by hardened soot. She worked the steel scraper around its edge until the hinge gave with a sound like a cough. Black flakes spilled across the floor. Wearing one of Elias's masks, she climbed through the lean-to onto the lower roof with the rods over one shoulder and the brush tied to her belt. The slate was damp. She moved on hands and knees, placing weight only above the rafters she could trace beneath the roofline. At the chimney, she removed a cracked clay cap, assembled 3 rod sections, and fed the wire brush downward in short turns. It stopped 6 feet below. June remembered Elias's warning and held still. She raised the brush, turned it a quarter turn, and lowered it again. This time, it scraped through. A sheet of creosote broke loose inside the flue and fell with a long, rushing sound into the furnace below. She added rods until the brush reached the clean-out, then worked it up and down for nearly 4 hours. Creosote came away in brittle scales, some glossy as black glass, some soft enough to stain her gloves brown. By the time she climbed down, her shoulders trembled. She filled the galvanized bucket twice with soot and carried it away from the creek. Then she sealed 2 narrow cracks in the furnace throat with cement, pressing it in with a wet spoon and smoothing the surface with her thumb. She waited until morning before attempting a fire. The first flame came from 3 curls of newspaper dry walnut twigs and a single split board taken from the collapsed lean-to. Smoke rolled forward, once paused beneath the furnace arch, then gathered itself and drew upward. June held her palm near the opening. The pull was steady. She fed in 2 more pieces of wood. Heat entered the room slowly, first touching the brick, then the iron pan, then the stiff fingers she held above it. She boiled well water and cooked oats in the enamel pot, with half an apple sliced through them. It was the first hot meal she had eaten since Attleboro. She sat on the floor with the pot between her boots and listened to rain strike a roof that no longer felt entirely hostile. That afternoon, she began the workroom inventory. She cleaned only enough to understand what had been left. On a walnut shelf stood 3 hide-bound beading books, their prepared skin pages stiff but intact. Beneath them lay a brass scale with weights no larger than shirt buttons. A long drawer held agate burnishers wrapped in yellowed muslin, each stone worn smooth at one edge by another hand's pressure. She found a pair of gold scissors with finger loops too small for modern work gloves, a blackened crucible 2 horn scoops, and a wooden mold cut with shallow squares for trimming leaf. The 16-pound hammer beside the marble block was not the only one. 5 lighter hammers hung from pegs, their handles dark where palms had polished them. The smallest bore an S burned near the grip. June lifted it down. Silas had marked his tools that way, using the heated tip of a square nail. She turned the hammer under the window light. The S leaned slightly to the right, exactly as it had on his furnace tongs. For several minutes she stood without moving. Then she set the hammer on the marble and heard a note she did not expect. The Mallet block should have answered with the dense, brief sound of stone. Instead, the strike carried a faint wooden hollowness beneath it. June tapped again, lighter this time. The center sounded solid. The north edge did not. She knelt and examined the iron straps around the block's 4 legs. Dust had gathered evenly, except near the back right foot, where the floor showed a clean crescent. Someone had shifted the block and returned it almost, but not precisely, to its former position. The marble weighed close to 100 pounds. June could not lift it. She found a length of oak beneath the counter, slid the steel scraper under one edge, and used the oak as a lever. The block rose less than an inch. She pushed a brick beneath it, moved to the opposite side, and repeated the process until the marble stood high enough to expose a circular seam in the floor. Set between the pine planks was a cedar disc 12 inches across. Its surface had been rubbed with beeswax, which explained why the surrounding damp had not swollen it shut. 2 holes near the edge were barely wide enough for fingertips. June hooked the gold scissors into them and turned. The disc resisted, then moved. A smell of cedar and sealed cloth rose from below. The cavity was lined with tin and deep enough to hold several wrapped packages. June did not reach in immediately. She removed the brick supports one by one, lowered the marble safely onto the floor beside its frame, and swept the dust away from the opening. Only then did she light the kerosene lamp and place it near the edge. The first package was wrapped in oiled linen and tied with waxed cord. Inside lay a complete set of narrow-faced beating hammers, 8 in all, arranged by weight. Their heads were free of rust. Each handle bore the same right-leaning S. Beneath them rested a small copper ingot, 3 strips of rolled gold sealed in parchment, and a packet of prepared gold beater's skin kept between cedar boards. The skin remained pale and flexible when June touched its corner. The second package held a book covered in dark green velvet. Its brass clasp had tarnished, but the fabric beneath the dust was still soft. June opened it carefully. 100 leaves of pure gold rested between tissue-thin pages. They were square, exact, and so thin that her breath made the uppermost leaf tremble without lifting. No patchiness marked the surface. No torn corner disturbed the edges. Each page carried the patient result of thousands of measured blows. June closed the clasp. At the bottom of the chamber sat a rectangular tin box and a cream envelope sealed with red wax. The envelope bore no name, only the words, "For the one who opens this." She set it aside unopened. The tin box had been wrapped twice in wool. Inside were paper bills bound in cotton tape and cloth rolls heavy with coins. June carried everything to the front counter, closed the shutters against the wind, and began counting beneath the lamp. The bills came first, 5s, 10s, 20s, and several $100 notes older than she was. The coins required more time. There were Liberty Head half-eagles, British sovereigns, French, 20-franc roosters, and worn Morgan dollars that had likely been kept for their silver rather than their face value. Among them lay a purple heart. In a black case, the ribbon faded at the fold. The engraving on the reverse read, Thomas E. Vale, 1944. June made columns on the back pages of the county repair manual. She counted once, then again. On the third count, she separated every roll and checked the arithmetic against the brass scale weights, as though accuracy of hand might guard her from misunderstanding what lay before her. The total was $55,800. Not wealth enough to erase a life. Enough to change its next decisions. She returned the gold leaf book to its linen and placed the tools beside Silas's whetstone. The money remained on the counter in plain stacks, while the unopened envelope waited beneath the lamp. Outside dusk had turned the creek the color of pewter. June carried the envelope to the rear step, but did not break the wax. She sat with it across her knees and watched water pass beneath bare alder branches. A muskrat crossed upstream, leaving a narrow V that widened and disappeared against both banks. The cold entered through her coat. She stayed until the last visible current became darkness. The house had been waiting for her. Morning entered through the front windows in two pale bars. June set the sealed envelope beside the brass scale and warmed her hands over the furnace before touching it. The wax had hardened almost brown, stamped with the faint outline of a hammer crossed by a square. When she turned the envelope toward the light, she recognized the writing. Silas had formed his capital letters with the same narrow downward stroke. She broke the seal with the gold scissors. "My dear one, whoever you are, if you have found this chamber, then the county has failed to tear down the shop, the marble has not split, and someone still knows that a floor can keep a promise longer than a person can. My name is Abigail Ruth Vale. Dr. Miriam Levy at Rhode Island Hospital in Providence told me in March of 1988 that the cancer had reached my liver. She gave me 6 months. Doctors must speak in measurements because silence would be crueler. I have used 4 of those months putting this room in order. Our trade began with Nathaniel Vale, born in Birmingham, England in 1811, who came to Providence in 1846 and beat leaf for sign painters on Weybosset Street. His son Amos Nathaniel Vale opened this shop in 1879. Amos taught his daughter Clara, born here in 1878, though customers were told her work belonged to her father. Clara taught my father Edwin Vale in 1912. Edwin taught me after school and during the winters when orders slowed. 4 generations, one hammer rhythm, and more lies about who had made the finest leaves than I care to count. The trade closed on September 30th, 1956. That was the last day I completed a full beating packet here. The room has stood silent for more than 30 years. My husband, Thomas Edward Vale, was killed near Saint-Lô, France, in July 1944. The army returned his Purple Heart, a folded flag, and a letter written by someone who had not known the sound of his laugh. Our son had died in infancy 3 years earlier. After Thomas was gone, I kept working because the hammer asked only that I lift it again. Work can be stern, but it does not pretend. If you intend to use these tools, begin carefully. Anneal rolled gold at approximately 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit until the surface relaxes, then allow it to cool without quenching. Cut the first squares no wider than 1 inch. Place 1 square between each prepared skin and turn the packet every 15 minutes so the metal does not travel toward one edge. Begin with the 12-pound hammer, never the 16, and strike from the shoulder rather than the wrist. After 2 hours, divide each leaf into 4. Beat the final packet until the leaf reaches nearly 1/250,000th of an inch, or until a breath makes it rise but does not tear it. Do not hurry the corners. The money beneath this letter came from 50 years of wages, war bonds, repairs, and coins set aside whenever a customer paid in cash. It is not a reward. It is stored time. Use what is required to keep the roof above the tools and the water away from the floor. Keep enough for the person who comes after you. The velvet book contains 100 leaves I made in the winter of 1955. They were the most even of my life. I could never sell them. Pride is a poor reason to keep useful things hidden, but I was not always wise. There is another marker beyond the back door near the creek. Look for a flat stone bearing the crossed hammer and square. Thomas placed it there before he left for the war. Beneath the walnut tree is one more thing I could not bring myself to uncover. Perhaps you will know when the proper day has come. Inheritance is not what the dead place in your hands. It is the work they leave unfinished, and whether you choose to do it honestly. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Abigail Ruth Vale, August 21, 1988. June read the letter once without moving. She read it a second time, standing beside the marble block, her thumb resting over the line about Silas. Then she folded each page along its original creases, neither adding a new bend nor smoothing away the old ones, and returned them to the envelope. The back door scraped against the threshold when she opened it. Frost still held the grass beneath the lean-to. June followed the creek downstream, searching the ground where exposed roots made dark loops through the bank. 20 yards beyond the outhouse, half concealed beneath moss, she found a flat gray stone. Its face bore the crossed hammer and square from the wax seal. She cleared it with both hands. Thomas E. Vale. There was no body beneath it. Only the marker, a small place where someone had chosen to keep his name within hearing of the shop. June returned carrying a sprig of winterberry and placed it above the inscription. Inside, she opened the purple heart case. She set a kitchen match to the stub of an old beeswax candle found near the beading books, then placed the metal where the flame touched its purple ribbon and bronze profile with a quiet strip of light. For several minutes, she stood beside it, listening to the furnace draw. The people who had helped her came back through small objects. Mrs. Pike's tax form directions remained folded inside the deed. Elias Potter's dust masks hung from a nail near the chimney. The librarian's handwriting covered the back of the classified card. At the bus station, a woman whose name June had never learned had wrapped rye bread in clean paper and pressed it into her hands without asking where she slept. None of them had solved her life. Each had made the next hour possible. Before this story moves on, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no reason to notice. Tell us in the comments what it was, and if you can pass that same kind of care to another person before the week is over. That night, June placed the velvet leaf book, Silas's marked hammer, and Abigail's letter beside her bedding. The tin box remained closed beneath the counter. She slept facing the tools, while the candle's final thread of smoke disappeared into the repaired chimney. The first snow came on December soon, laying 4 inches across Calder Street and finding every opening in the studio roof. June woke with snow sifted over the foot of her blanket. She brushed it into a bucket, fed the furnace, and read the roofing chapter in Elias's repair manual 3 times. The roof measured 32 feet by 20, allowing for the lean of the eaves. She calculated 8 squares of slate coverage, 9 rolls of 30-pound felt, and nearly 1,200 copper nails, once breakage and overlap were included. Elias studied the figures, crossed out 2 lines, and handed her a roofing hatchet with a narrow face and leather dark handle. "My brother Daniel's," he said. "It should work again." A retired roofer named Walter Grady arrived the following morning. He was 71 with a right knee that clicked each time he climbed, and a carpenter's pencil tucked permanently behind one ear. June offered to pay him from Abigail's cash. Walter shook his head. "Pay me by listening." They sistered the worst rafter with a new 2x8, bolting it beside the split timber rather than removing what still carried weight. Walter snapped a chalk line across the felt, then showed June how to set each nail in 3 strokes, 1 to start it, 1 to seat it, 1 light strike to finish. When June drove a copper nail too high, Walter touched it with the hatchet. "That nail's proud. I can flatten it. Pull it." They worked for 11 days. Snow thawed into the underlayment, froze overnight, and made the staging shine before sunrise. June hauled slate up in a rope sling, trimmed broken edges with the hatchet, and staggered every joint so water could not find a straight path downward. By mid-December, the last ridge piece sat beneath a narrow cap of lead flashing. Walter climbed down without ceremony, folded the ladder, and stood in the road while sleet struck the new roof. "It will outlive both of us," he said. That night, rain passed over the building. Not 1 drop reached the floor. The chimney showed its true damage after Christmas. Several bricks had spalled until their faces could be scraped away with a thumbnail, and the mortar between them had softened into pale powder. June removed only what had failed. Walter lent her a cold chisel, and Elias ordered hydraulic lime in a paper sack, warning her not to replace old breathing mortar with hard Portland cement. For the furnace throat, she mixed 1 part fire clay to 3 parts washed sand. Above the roofline, she used hydraulic lime sand and water, worked to the consistency of stiff cream. The repair took 3 weeks in temperatures that remained in the 20s. June warmed bricks beside the furnace before setting them, so frozen masonry would not steal moisture from the mortar. Every 15 minutes she climbed down, held her bare hands near the fire, until feeling returned, then went back to the scaffold. Gloves kept her warmer, but dulled the pressure in her fingertips, and pressure was how she knew whether a joint had been filled or merely covered. She rebuilt the upper courses one at a time, matching the original bond. A temporary tarp snapped above her while she tooled each joint with a rounded iron and protected the new mortar overnight beneath damp burlap. On January 28th, she lit the test fire. A twist of newspaper caught then walnut kindling. Smoke rose through the repaired throat without curling into the room. Outside, it left the chimney in one straight gray column. The draw was clean. June added a split log and watched the mortar remain still. Beneath the gold dust, the workroom floor was white pine fastened with hand-cut rosehead nails whose dark heads had survived nearly a century and a half of hammering. June set every loose nail below the surface with a narrow punch and lifted only 3 boards, all rotted near the back door. Elias found matching pine in the loft above his store. The new boards were too pale, but he told her time would correct what stain could not. She rented a random orbit sander for $14 per day. The first pass used 80 grit paper and removed grime wax and shallow burn marks. The second, at 120 grit, erased the circular scratches left by haste. The final 220 grit pass took almost the entire 3rd day, because June stopped often to vacuum the seams and feel the grain with her palm. She saved the dust containing visible gold in a glass jar. For the finish, she wiped on 3 thin coats of boiled linseed oil, working along the boards rather than across them. Each coat darkened the pine, and the third required a 48-hour cure before she allowed herself to cross the room in socks. What had looked like dirty honey shifted toward mahogany deepest around the Mallet block, where generations of feet had turned. One morning she woke unable to lift the sander. She carried no tools outside. At the marsh below the creek, a great blue heron stood in shallow water with its neck folded and one leg hidden. June watched it for hours. The bird moved only twice, each motion exact enough to make stillness appear like work. She did nothing that day. The following morning, she finished the threshold. The studio had 8 windows. 3 had no glass. 4 were cracked from corner to corner. The final window above the front counter retained one wavering pane stamped in the putty with the date 1788. June cleaned that pane with vinegar and linen, preserving every bubble and distortion. She rebuilt the others one sash at a time. After removing the brittle glazing, she softened. P33 putty between her palms, rolled it into narrow ropes, and pressed it firmly against the rabbets. Each pane rested on small glazing points before she drew the putty knife at a low angle, leaving a clean bevel that would shed rain and remain hidden behind the exterior paint line. The sash cords had rotted inside the weight pockets. June replaced them with 1/4-inch braided cotton, lowering each iron counterweight carefully and tying a figure-8 knot large enough to hold beneath the mortise. When the restored sash rose and stayed at shoulder height, she opened and closed it 3 times before moving to the next. Cold wind entered through the empty frames during the work. She hung blankets inside and warmed one room at a time with the furnace. Putty stiffened in the low temperatures, so she kept each unopened tub near the hearth and carried only a handful to the window. The 8th window took an entire February afternoon. June reset its upper pane, smoothed the final bead, and wiped the knife on a square of burlap. Outside, a chickadee landed on a black walnut branch close enough that she saw the quick rise of its breast. It turned its head toward the new glass. Then it flew across the creek. 2 winters later, in December 2024, June completed her first full book of gold leaf. She had practiced on copper-silver, and scraps purchased 1 coin at a time, refusing to touch Abigail's 100 perfect leaves. On the morning she began, the furnace held steady near 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. She annealed a narrow ribbon of gold, cut the softened metal into measured squares, and placed them between prepared skins. Every 15 minutes, she turned the packet. The 12-pound hammer rose from her shoulder and returned with the patient rhythm she remembered from Silas's shop. After hours of division, repacking, and lighter blows, the final leaf lifted beneath her breath without tearing. June carried it to the front window on a squirrel hair tip and laid it across a small wooden frame. The gold settled over the bowl in one quiet sheet, catching the uneven winter light. She did not speak. The restored studio needed no praise. White pine floors reflected the furnace glow. The windows rose easily on their cotton cords. Abigail's hammers hung above the marble block ordered by weight, while the velvet book remained closed inside a walnut cabinet June had built beneath the counter. Rain no longer entered. Smoke went upward. The building had become useful again. The brass key had waited on the mantel since June found it beneath the third cellar step. Its bow was shaped like the crossed hammer and square. She had tried it in every lock inside the studio, then in the lean-to, and the old well cover without success. On December 16th, after finishing the gold leaf, she carried it to the larger walnut tree beyond the creek. The trunk had grown around an iron plate no wider than June's palm. Lichen concealed 3 edges and years of bark had closed over the 4th. June cleaned it with a wooden scraper until she exposed a keyhole. The brass key turned once. A shallow compartment opened inside the tree. Within it lay a 48-star American flag folded into a tight triangle, its cotton dry and faintly scented with cedar. Beneath the flag rested a note dated August 3, 1944, written in Abigail's hand, only days after the telegram reporting Thomas's death in France. She had written that the flag must not remain forever inside a grieving house. It should be carried into daylight when someone could hold it without asking the cloth to repair what war had taken. She had placed it in the walnut because Thomas had planted the tree before leaving for Europe, pressing the soil down with the heel of his boot, while Abigail watched from the back step. June unfolded nothing. She held the flag against her coat, returned the note to its envelope, and carried both inside. On June 6, 2025, the 81st anniversary of D-Day, she took Thomas Vale's Purple Heart and folded flag to the Rhode Island Veterans Memorial Cemetery in Exeter. A cemetery official helped her place the medal beside his name in the memorial records. June stood beneath a cedar while the flag moved gently in her hands. There was no audience and no speech. Before leaving, she placed 1 gold leaf square inside a paper envelope beneath the marker. Of the cash, June used 4 coins. 1 purchased the raw gold for her first practice packet. 1 paid for prepared skins. 2 covered furnace repairs that could not be postponed. She converted none of the remaining coins into ordinary money. The bill's sovereigns, half Eagles francs and Morgan dollars, returned to the cedar chamber beneath the marble. She added a new ledger recording every expense and every repair. On its first page, she wrote for the next one. The shop reopened without a sign in the newspaper. June pinned an index card to the corkboard inside Bellini's cafe. Hand-beaten gold leaf, frame and lettering repairs, Calder Street, Wednesdays by appointment. Doris moved the card closer to the coffee urn, where people waiting for change could see it. The first request came from a church needing 6 letters repaired on a memorial board. The second involved a cracked oval frame around a wedding photograph. By spring, more than 40 names filled June's mailing list, written by hand on cards kept in a flour tin. She accepted only the work she could finish honestly. Caleb arrived one April afternoon on the same old Schwinn, though his knees now rose too high above the handlebars. A long wooden board rested across his shoulders. He had carved the original studio name into walnut, matching the surviving letters from the weathered sign. Beneath A. Vale he had added Mercer in smaller type. At the bottom, where the old board had once read, and daughter. Caleb had cut 2 new words, and daughters. June ran her thumb through the fresh grooves. There was only one daughter, she said. Caleb leaned the bicycle against the walnut tree. Not anymore. They hung the sign above the door using the original iron hook and one new bracket forged by Elias. It did not sit perfectly level, June noticed. She left it that way. That evening after Caleb rode home, she opened Abigail's letter and placed a blank sheet beside it. June sharpened a pencil with Silas's gold scissors. She dated the page, tested the point in the margin, and began with the same words that had waited beneath the marble for more than 30 years. My dear one, whoever you are. She wrote about the bowed wall, the broken suitcase, and the first winter when her hands had gone numb every 15 minutes above the chimney. She described the correct sound of a finished packet and warned that a hurried corner would reveal itself under light. She named Mrs. Pike Elias Walter Doris Caleb and Reverend Boyd because work inherited alone was never truly done alone. She did not explain who deserved the studio. She wrote only that the next keeper should leave something useful behind. Near midnight, June folded the unfinished letter and placed it beneath the velvet book. Outside, the creek moved loudly with spring rain. The new sign touched the brick once whenever the wind shifted. The house had been waiting for her. June extinguished the furnace lamp, crossed the dark workroom, without waking a single loose board, and rested her hand on the worn hollow of the marble block. A gold leaf beater's studio waits. It has always waited. In the county clerk's office, Alma Pike retired the following year. On her final afternoon, she emptied the brass clips, dried pens, and obsolete tax forms from her desk. At the bottom drawer, she found a worn $1 bill repaired with clear tape. She placed it back beneath the tray. The next clerk would find it when the drawer was ready to be opened.
The Heroic Veteran Dogs is a fictional channel created to entertain, educate, and inspire the audience by exploring the deep, loyal bond between veterans and their dogs. All channel content does not represent real individuals, actual events, or documented cases. Any resemblance to real people, animals, or events is entirely coincidental.